What's up, guys? So one of the common concerns I get with the real estate market today is I'm sitting on a 2 or 3% interest rate in my current home. It's just so hard to give up that rate when you're moving on to something else and you're potentially looking at a 6-7% interest rate potentially. So one of the things that I'm doing, and one of the things I would suggest to people is don't get rid of that old house. Keep it as a rental. Continue to pay that thing. Let it build wealth for you in the future. So we're going to look at a couple things here, strategies and ways, things you can do to look into doing that for yourself. So one of the big hangups that could come with doing this is obviously, can you afford to keep the old house and the new house at the same time? Can you get lending toward the new house if you haven't given up that old loan? So number one, I would say run the numbers for yourself. Can that old house cash flow? You need to find out what will it rent for, what's your current payment, which I'm guessing your payment's pretty low if you're sitting on a 2 or 3% interest rate. So we're going to show you some ways to figure that out for yourself, because if you can make more in rent than you can pay, then you know you can afford to keep it. It's going to cash flow positive. The second part of that is, can you get a loan for the new house without giving up the loan for the old one? So more than likely what that's going to come down to is something called debt to income ratio. So we'll start there. The big thing to think of when you're thinking of debt to income ratio is basically what a lender's going to do is they're going to look at your total income on a monthly basis. They're going to look at your total debt on a monthly basis. They're going to say, just for example, let's say I make $10,000 a month and I've got a $1,000 car payment. Right now I'm at a 10% debt to income ratio. They have numbers that they will let you go up to say 40, 45, maybe even 50%. So again, going back to your $10,000 a month example, you make $10,000, you're already spending $1,000, and they'll let you spend up to $50,000. So you've got $4,000 a month in income that they will allow you to spend towards the house. So take that $4,000 a month, kind of backtrack out based on what rates are and the term and all those things, and that gives you an idea of what kind of house you can afford. So how does that apply here? Well, if you keep your current house as a rental, you can actually use the income from the rent on that house to add on to your debt to income ratio. So if you can get a lease signed to go into place as you're moving out of the house and going to the new house, you can use that income from rent to add on to your debt to income ratio. So what that does is kind of basically makes your current house a wash in that category. So as long as it's cash flowing positive and you can keep supporting that house, then you could probably get the next loan without ditching that old loan. So that's the debt to income side. The other side we get into is, again, making sure that we know that it's going to cash flow positive. So how do you find that out? So number one is going to be, obviously, what your payment is on it. So let's say your payment currently is $600 a month, and that's what you're paying towards it. So you know that $600 a month. So what's the next part? You're going to find out what can you get in rent. So one of the things that I would highly suggest, number one, is talk to a real estate agent. Talk to one who knows a lot about investment properties and rentals and things like that. So they probably have their thumb on the pulse and can give you a pretty basic idea of what you're going to be able to get in rent. What you can also do, something I do a lot, is something called rentometer.com. So rentometer.com is a subscription-based service. It's pretty affordable, so it's probably worth it to sign up for it, and you can do these searches. So I'll just show you here on rentometer.com. You can take your house, type in the address. So I'm going to say, just type in the address, and I'm going to say this is a 4-bed. Says 1.5 or more. You don't have to fill all these things in, so you can just kind of do the main things, and then I'll give an idea of square footage. So let me say I want to find stuff that's between 1,400 and 1,800 square feet, and check rents. This is going to come back with a report. So this is telling me that the average rent for the search of what I did is $2,079 per month. The median is $1,950, and so on. So one of the things you get through a subscription here is you can view the Pro Report. So Pro Report will come up, and this is actually going to show me comps, just like as if I were selling a house. I'm going to look for comps and find stuff that's sold that is similar to the house that I'm trying to sell. That's going to tell me what that house is worth. This is just doing comps on the rent. So we're going to find other properties that are like ours that are rented to tell us what they're renting for. So this gives you a lot more basic numbers. You can see some charting here along, like, you know, the historic trend line and things. But the thing I look at a lot is come down here to the comps. So these are actual houses that are listed and sold. So you could actually look these houses up and find out how similar they are to your house. So like, here's one 2.39 miles away from the house that I'm looking at. It's $2,200. It's rented for $2,200 a month. It is 1,784 square feet, 4-bed, 2-bath house. So in my example, this would be a pretty good comp. This would tell me 2,200 is a solid starting place for where for what I'm doing. So you could probably also look this up on Google or something like that and find pictures and see how comparable it is in quality and things to what you're renting. So again, Rentometer, good way to find out what you're going to rent for. So take that amount you're going to rent for, subtract out your mortgage, and then you know kind of how much you have to work with. Obviously, there are other things to consider. You want to make sure that you consider vacancy. I think in general, most people base it on that house being vacant, an average of 1 month per year. So roughly 10% is what you want to take off for vacancy. That might be a little high, so you want to consider that when you're doing it. So if you're going to get $2,000 a month, consider the fact that you're only going to maybe make $1,800 a month after vacancy. I then take another solid 10% or so for maintenance. Take off another $200 for maintenance that you're going to keep up with. So that brings you down to $1,600 a month. Then you want to think of things like you're going to have to replace a roof eventually. You're going to have to replace HVAC eventually. All those things. You want to consider all these things to make sure that you're actually going to cash flow positive, because the last thing you want to do is think that you're going to cash flow positive but not consider a roof or an HVAC or maintenance or any of those things, and all of a sudden you're in the negative and you thought you were going to be in the positive. So those are all things to consider as you're trying to decide if you can afford to keep that old house and move into your new house. Another thing to think about is, are you going to do a long-term rental or a short-term rental? And what I mean by that, long-term rental is your typical, signing at least a year lease at a time and having one renter that's going to be in there for a good long time. That can be the simplest, easiest way a lot of times to rent your house, because you're only dealing with one tenant. You don't have to have people coming in and out all the time, all that stuff. But you're also probably not going to get quite as much per month in rent as you would if you did a short-term rental. So short-term rental, what I'm talking about, is something more along the lines of an Airbnb. You are going to get more money. I mean, you can imagine like the typical Airbnb stay would be, $150, $200 a night, let's say. So if you're going by that, a 5-night week, you're talking $1,000 in a week, as opposed to potentially maybe getting $1,000 per month from a long-term renter. So make your decisions there. One thing to think about with short-term rental is you are going to have to furnish the house. So that's going to be an upfront cost, but maybe you want to leave your furniture behind from your old place. So you're going to have to prep that place for that. There's also going to be fees, of course. You pay to Airbnb and all those things. So consider all that, but make the decision whether you want it to be a short-term or a long-term rental. That's really all the things that I consider when I do it. I do think it's always a really good, it's almost always a really good long-term gain to keep that house as a rental, especially if you've got a low interest rate. You're basically letting tenants continue to pay that off for you, and then 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you've got a paid off house that's been paid off by other people. It's going to be worth a lot more because of appreciation. So now what maybe your first home was you paid $150,000 for. Well, 25 years down the road, that $150,000 house might be worth $400,000, and that's not an understatement at an average of 4% appreciation per year. So down the road, you're going to have a $400,000 asset that's paid for by other people, and that's not even considering all the money you've made from rent and cash flow in the meantime. So I think that's a really smart thing to do if you're holding on to that 2 or 3% interest rate. Keep that house as a rental. Hopefully this is helpful. If there's any other questions, and I'm sure there are because there's no way to cover everything in a video like this, give us a call. You can call me, text me, Facebook, Instagram, whatever's good for you, and we'd love to help.